Black Skylands is an early access game released on October 9th of 2021. As of this moment, most of the content is released and they have a goal to release on June 11th of this year. The gameplay is a mixture of the tactical and speedy gameplay from Hotline Miami and the bullet hell elements seen in top-down shooters, while expanding the dynamic into ship warfare, where you handle a skyship and fight off dozens of enemies at a time. Presenting this loop is the semi-open level of Aspya, the nation of people that live among the floating continent. This progression is designed in a metroidvania style as you gain equipment to open areas that used to be blocked off. Story is exceptionally important and the presentation is managed with the intent of invoking emotions from our players. You play as Eva, a young woman that roams the sky in her ship, searching for secrets about the mysterious swarm and about the liberation of her friends and family. The crisis and the intimate problems that Eva faces drive your progression and challenge as you uncover the dire reality of her problems. However, despite the interesting presentation, tested and competent gameplay loop, and novel ship expansion to that loop, the game fails to reach its potential set by its great foundations. So I believe we need to tackle the story first, as it seems to be the thread that holds this game together. I say this because there isn't much to say or expand outside the elements, as the concepts are unique and the characters are interesting. The game is set in the Skylands, floating pieces of land that used to make up the earth below them. You live in Aspya, the nation that makes up the islands that we are talking about in the Skylands. This is a nation made up of factions that coexist in the floating island. The factions live at peace, but it is short-lived. The many problems that arise from politics and the external threat of the swarm, these being a parasitical race of creatures that devours everything in their path, has destroyed the trust between the factions, leading them to a civil war and a split inside the ranks. This is where our story with Eva starts. Eva is the daughter of Richard, leader of the Earners, a faction of farmers and livestock herders that supplies food for the nation. He used to adventure and look for treasures, but after going into the swarm area and being lost for months, he returns with information about the creatures. This obsession of his disgruntles the Falcons, a tribe of guards or soldiers that protect Aspya, and their leader Cain, a longtime friend that worries for the citizens of the nation. The prologue does a great job of presenting these characters, the world, and the tension between these leaders. The section ends with a bombardment on the Earner ship by the Falcons as they rebel against Aspya and take control of the airspace of the nation. 7 years pass and we play as Eve once more. Before she was a child, now she's an 18-year-old woman and the leader of the Earners. This is where the narrative starts to fall apart, as we don't see the important moments that took Eva from the frightened girl in the prologue to the capable but loving woman of the main game. This lack of understanding for storytelling permeates the entire game, as characters are not developed or introduced properly into the problems our Eva faces. This makes everything presented look like a mess and it becomes boring really quickly. Eva herself is well written, she's skillful, kind and forgiving, she is capable of leadership and great love, not losing the sight for the people she is entrusted to protect. She doesn't need to grow as a character per se because she has what is called a flat arc. Opposition, tribulations, and a proper and dramatic resolution is all you need for a good story. Characters come to develop in these problems they resolve, but Skylands fails to provide anything outside gameplay for a proper and reasonable development of tension. This means outside of elements in the prologue, there isn't much to write about. Barely anything happens and gameplay makes no change on behest of the few moments where something dramatic is occurring. So there isn't a lot of important story beats that lead the characters to change an aspect of your lives. This is not good. Something to note is that the game is not finished, it is in early access and we don't have the end of the story, but what is presented up to this moment is not good. Final comments on the narrative design. The swarm area, which is foreshadowed in the beginning of the game, in the game page, and throughout the story as you play it, is nothing to write home about. It is sadly something that does not expand the story. It does not present a new element to the crisis the people of Aspya and Eva are facing. So there is nothing added out of that ominous sort of area that is presented to you, which makes up a big part of the marketing and a big part of the initial presentation of the game, as the prologue focuses on how the factions of Aspya deal with this sort of expansion of the swarm. So it's definitely not something that benefits the game. It clearly shows that developers don't know how to write a story. And I don't say this to insult them or to make it seem like their game is not worthwhile, because there is an interesting proposition with the story. But it is quite clear that they didn't hire someone that knew how to write, or it's obvious they didn't develop the skills in order to write a proper story. So that's something that is definitely putting the game down. It makes it harder than it already is to get through the game, as the rewards that you would usually get by uncovering new story beats is not there. Now this is where the game has shining moments. Gameplay serves as a great foundation for the mix they have in the game. Top-down shooting with bullet hell elements is excellent to provide a rewarding but challenging experience in any game it is used. These elements are extended into the ship gameplay, giving it an interesting twist, as speed and maneuvering is essential, the same way rolling and sidestepping is when facing human enemies. However, despite the initial similarities and moments of brilliant design, the gameplay begins to slow down and stop progressing due to an inherent design mistake from part of the developers, in my opinion. The progression of the game is ruled and stopped by a power metric that takes into consideration the value of your weapons, their mods, and the equipment you have on. This is quickly introduced but exceptionally important in value because it tells you initially you will encounter quickly. This is the grind of the game. Progression is not hard-coded into not allowing you to set foot into these areas, but your experience and lack of success will show you why you should increase in value. Enemies become bullet sponges and you will be forced to grind resources, hunt or buy mods that benefit the use of the guns on the enemies, and kite them until you kill them. This also affects the weapons you are giving, as only hard-hitting weapons with a fast fire rate are consistently fun and useful in battles. To compound this issue with combat, you have a limited amount of ammunition, and there is going to be a lot of moments where you run out of bullets for your workhorse weapons, making you leave and come back to finish the job. This aspect of the game considerably slows down the progression and the way you combat your enemies, because you will have the expectations of going back for ammunition and then coming back, slowing the game down even more so. And the biggest issue is this only grows in magnitude the further you progress into the story. Enemies become more bullet spongy and require significant amounts of kiting as you take their health away. This makes the game boring and exceptionally repetitive quickly, forcing you to grind for the value's sake in order to see the end of a 20-hour indie game, and that is not a good design choice. This is without having spoken about the swarm and aerial combat. The issue is aerial combat is basically non-existent. There are few main missions that require you to engage in somewhat challenging battles, but most of these fights will be in the open airspace and to your prerogative. This aspect is destroyed by the grinding as well. Upgrading your ship, which only becomes useful once you enter the swarm, is mind-numbing. The ship can be ignored up to this point. This speaks volume about the design outlook of these features. And now that we're talking about the swarm, let's get into that area in terms of gameplay. This area is sadly one of the biggest letdowns of the game for me. I was expecting the rush and survival foreshadowed in the early hours to be important here. This is not only the case, and most of what happens is a replacement of the dynamics in the regular airspace. Monsters just hang around areas of the section and attack when nearby, just as the pirates do when you just go near them. This area also replicates an aspect of the progression outside, but with worse outcomes. The reason why this area becomes such a horrible presentation of that is because the swarm needs you to craft weapons that are specific to deal with them, meaning that if you use the other weapons, there's a chance of less damage and hence they become more bullet spongy. This is not good at all. The beginning of the game has some grindy elements, but the end game is just a grind for better weapons and ship parts. There is also a raid mode of sorts. It just drives you to combat with the swarm in the islands and their airspace. Nothing changes here. Now, some notes. The crafting is as you would expect. You gather resources and upgrade the bench needed for such craft. This also plays into a barely developed element where you build the fodder ship, this being the home of the earners. I didn't mention it earlier because there's nothing of significance that occurs there outside of crafting and it being sort of your home base to some extent. Now, this is something you will notice quickly, and unless you have a high tolerance for grinding and gaming in general, this is not a game you will enjoy. In conclusion, the game suffers from a badly written story and a grindy progression system that never creates the same urgency for growth outside these values. This is not a good combination. I wanted this game to be interesting, as we all do when we start a game in hopes of enjoying it. Sadly, this is not the case, and Black Skylands is not good. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to see more videos like this, hit the like button, subscribe, and push the notification bell. Thanks for coming. God bless you.